Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Blueprint. Okay, so today I want to start with a number 828 meters. That is the height of the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. For reference, that's roughly twice the height of the Empire State Building. It is so tall that people on the upper floors experience sunset roughly 3 minutes after people on the ground floor do, because from that height you can actually see the curve of the earth. The sun sets later the higher up you are, and that is not a metaphor, that is just physics. And I think that detail captures something really important about this building. It was not built to be practical, it was built to be impossible, and then it became possible. And now it sits in the middle of Dubai, and you kind of have to ask yourself, what was that actually about? What did it cost? Who paid for it? Who benefited? And what was it worth? Those are the questions I want to go through today because the Burj Khalifa is not just an engineering story, it's also an economic story. And honestly, once you dig into it, it becomes a tale to wonder. To understand the Burj Khalifa, you have to understand Dubai in the early 2000s. Dubai is one of 7 emirates that make up the UAE, and that, unlike its neighbor Abu Dhabi, Dubai does not have much oil. Abu Dhabi sits on massive oil reserves, and Dubai has very little. By the 1990s, Dubai's leadership knew that whatever oil they would run out eventually, they needed a different plan. So they made a decision. They would branch themselves. They would turn Dubai into a destination, a hub, a place that the world couldn't ignore. They would build airports, hotels, financial districts, and yes, the tallest building on earth. The logic was that if you build something spectacular enough, businesses follow, tourists follow, and therefore money follows. Economics call this a signaling strategy. You invest in something highly visible, not just because it's useful, but because it sends a message about your capabilities and ambitions. Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Dubai's ruler, was very direct about this. He wanted to put Dubai on the map with something really sensational. And that is a quote from tourism executive at Nakheel Properties who worked closely with him. The building was never primarily about providing office space, it was about perception. Construction started in 2004. The building was designed by the American firm Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, the same firm behind the Willis Tower in Chicago and the One World Trade Center in New York. It took about 12,000 workers on site at peak construction. They poured concrete at night because Dubai's daytime heat, the concrete would cure too fast and crack. At the top, the concrete had to be pumped higher than any concrete pump had ever pumped before. Engineers had to invent new methods as they went, and the total construction cost came in at approximately $1.5 billion, which sounds like a lot, but compared to the other iconic skyscrapers, it's actually on the lower end. For example, the One World Trade Center was 3.9 billion, and the Shanghai Tower was 2.4 billion. The Burj Khalifa was developed by Emaar Properties, which is a Dubai-based real estate company that's partly government-owned. The financing was a mixture of private investment, pre-sold residential units, and the general financial ecosystem that Dubai had built during its 2000s boom. Here's the part I find genuinely interesting. A huge part of the residential units in the tower was sold before even the building was finished. At the peak of the market, some of the apartments in the Burj were selling for over $1,900 per square foot. People were buying based on the idea that prices would keep rising, and that is speculation. And speculation is a completely normal part of real estate markets, but it is also a warning sign when it becomes a primary engine of growth. By 2009, the tower was 95% sold, but here's what AI Geniza reported at the time. Most of the buyers were speculators who were never planning to move in. They were buying to flip, and when the 2008 financial crisis hit, flipping stopped. Dubai's property prices dropped to 40% in the first 3 months of 2009 alone, and that is one of the steepest property crashes anywhere in the world after the financial crisis. Here's where things get really uncomfortable. Dubai's state-owned conglomerate, Dubai World, which has been borrowing billions to fund construction, announced that in late 2009, it needed to restructure $26 billion in debt. That sent shockwaves through the financial global markets, and Dubai essentially needed a bailout. Abu Dhabi stepped in with $10 billion to prevent a default, and the price of that bailout, symbolically at least, was very significant. The building had been called the Burj Dubai, meaning Dubai Tower, and after the bailout, it was named the Burj Khalifa, after Dubai's ruler Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan. The tallest building in the world was renamed to acknowledge the man whose money saved the city that built it. And I think that basically tells you everything behind this in massive spectacle. Okay, so now let's try to think about this as an economist would. When you spend $1.5 billion on a building, what are you getting back? The direct financial returns are real. The Burj Khalifa houses luxury apartments, offices, the Armani Hotel, and two observation decks that charge significant entry fees. The upper observation deck on the 148th floor was at one point the highest in the world. Tourism revenue from the building alone runs into hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Dubai's tourism sector has grown dramatically since the building opened. Visitor numbers of the city went from around 7 million per year in the early 2000s to over 17 million by 2023. You cannot attribute all of that to one building, but the Burj Khalifa is genuinely central to Dubai's brand as a destination. Then there are indirect benefits, which are harder to measure but probably more significant. Dubai is now a major hub for international finance, business, and logistics. Global companies have set up regional headquarters there. The real estate market, despite the 2008 crash, recovered and has continued to grow. Foreign direct investments flow into the UAE have increased substantially over the last 2 decades since construction began. And the Burj Khalifa is not the only reason for any of that, but it's a central part of the strategy. So, here's where the cost-benefit analysis becomes complicated. The opportunity cost question is harder to answer here than it was with the Panama Canal, because Dubai is not a poor country, making a choice between infrastructure and poverty reduction. Dubai was a wealthy emirate, choosing between different kinds of investment. The question is more about whether the specific form of that investment, building the tallest building in the world, was the most efficient use of $1.5 billion, or whether it was different infrastructure that produced more sustainable long-term growth. And I honestly do not have the clean answer to that. The building clearly generated returns, but the broader development model that was a part of, one, it was built heavily on debt. Realistic expectation, borrowed growth that came very close to a catastrophic failure in 2009. The building survived though, and the city survived, and it was much closer than people realize. This is the part of every episode where I talk about the costs that do not show up in the official accounting. And with the Burj Khalifa, those costs are significant. The most serious one is labor. Burj Khalifa was built primarily by workers from South Asia and East Asia, most of them from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. According to a BBC investigation and a Human Rights Watch report from that time, these workers were housed in poor conditions and worked longer hours for very few pay. In 2006, in fact, skilled carpenters at the site were earning approximately £4.34 per day. General labourers were earning around £2.84 per day, and at a project where concrete was being poured every single day to build the tallest structure in human history, the people doing the physical work were earning only $3 a day. And that's an externality. This is a real externality. The cost of construction was kept lower in part because labor costs were suppressed. The workers who made the building possible did not share meaningfully in the economic value it created. The profits flowed to the Emaar properties, to investors, to the Dubai government, and to the city's broader economy. The workers went back to South Asia, and the building stands as one of the most photographed structures on earth, almost entirely disconnected in public perception from the conditions under which it was built. I want to be careful here not to be preachy about it, but I also think that it's impossible to do an honest economic analysis of the Burj Khalifa without acknowledging it. The cost-benefit ratio looks different when you look at the full cost of production. There's also an economic dimension. The Burj Khalifa uses an enormous amount of energy. Cooling a building of that scale in a desert climate is extraordinarily expensive in both financial and environmental terms. The UAE is one of the highest per capita carbon emitters in the world, partly because of the energy demands of buildings like this one. Dubai has made moves towards sustainability in recent years, but the Burj Khalifa as a structure is not particularly energy efficient. It was designed for spectacle, not sustainability, and maintaining it over the coming decades as the climate pressures increases is going to be a growing cost. One of the things that makes the Burj Khalifa very interesting to think about is how differently it looks depending on the time horizon that you use. In the short term, roughly from 2004 to 2009, the story is almost about excess. Dubai borrowed heavily, property prices inflated into a bubble, speculation ran unchecked, and the whole thing crashed and required a bailout from a neighboring country. The building itself was completed in December 2009, right in the middle of financial crisis, which means it opened on January 4, 2010, with property values in the tower at less than half their peak. That's not a great short-term picture. But to zoom out to a longer time frame, the picture changes. By 2013, Dubai's market had recovered. By 2018, it was growing strongly. By 2023, Dubai has become one of the most visited cities on earth, with a GDP that has grown enormously compared to the early 2000s. The tourism, the business, the real estate, everything that the Burj Khalifa helped anchor has generated large long term value. The building that has nearly symbolized the hubris became the anchor of a functional economic strategy. This is a larger, broader lesson in infrastructure economics. The discount rate problem I talked about in the Panama episode applies here. If you evaluate the Burj Khalifa purely on its short term returns, it looks like a near disaster built on speculation. But if you evaluate it within 20 or 30 years, it looks very defensible. And that's genuinely how I think infrastructure economic works. The harder question is what happens next. It's now about 15 years old and needs ongoing maintenance of a kind that's unusual for any building. The facade has to be cleaned regularly, which requires a specially designed machine that travels up and down the exterior. The mechanical systems in a building of this complexity are in constant need of attention. Annual maintenance costs are significant. Over a 50 or 100-year span, the total cost of keeping this building functional will exceed the original 1.5 billion construction budget. Whether the revenue it generates over that same period justifies those ongoing costs is a question that no one can fully answer yet, but it's the right question to be asking. Okay, so here's my honest take after spending a lot of time reading about this. I think that the Burj Khalifa is an economically complicated project that worked out better than it probably deserved to have given how it was financed and the risks that were taken. The 2008 crash could have been much worse for Dubai. The fact that Abu Dhabi had to step in and the building itself was continuing to generate tourism and prestige value through the recovery. There was a version of the story which the whole thing collapsed and the Burj Khalifa became a symbol, outreach, rather than ambition. Dubai got lucky to some degree, I would say. I also think that the signaling strategy was genuinely smart in concept, but Dubai had a real problem. It had limited oil, a smaller population, and no particular natural advantage as a business location. Building something so spectacular that it forced the world to pay attention was not irrational, it was a calculated bet on the power of perception to drive real economic outcomes. And that worked. Companies moved there, tourists came, and money followed. I also want to note something about how the building was named. Abu Dhabi saved Dubai with $10 billion and got a building name in their ruler in return. That's a diplomatic and economic transaction dressed up as honor. I think it is worth your eye out, and the infrastructure at this scale is never just infrastructure, it's always about politics. The bigger lesson I take is that infrastructure is never about the stuff that's built, it's about the trade friction and the global shipping and the DMIC and what it takes to build an economic identity and what risk you take. So the answer in Dubai's case is kind of yes, but not as much as the Panama Canal. It has economic risk and an enormous risk that too, which has significant human costs and is saved by a neighboring emirate. And that's a really honest answer. I think it's one of the most honest answers that you usually get. So that's it for today. Thank you for being here. In the next episode, we're going to go somewhere completely different, and I will see you then.